Hi knitters, I'm Marina Rivov, thanks for joining me. I recently found two pairs of completely worn out socks at my mom's, so I thought, let me try and remake them, turn them into something new. And at the end, I made 3 pairs of socks out of the 2 old ones. I hope this video will inspire you to take a new look at some old things that you might have and maybe give them a new life. This first pair was originally made with pure wool, and all the mending was also done with pure wool. Unfortunately, 100% wool doesn't last long in socks. Holes appear very quickly, especially in the heels and toes. It's much better to use special yarn designed for socks, even for mending. Here I have 3 examples of sock yarn. The first is Merino Yak by Regia. It's a blend of wool, yak, and 28% polyamide. The next one is Madrona by Haiku. Again, it's a blend of alpaca with wool and 20% nylon. And Patton's Croysock yarn, again wool with 25% nylon. So it's the addition of nylon or polyamide that makes sock yarn durable and more resistant to wear and tear. As an illustration of durability, I'd like to show you a pair of my very old socks that I made several years ago. This is the composition of the yarn. It contains 25% nylon. I wore these socks for about 4 or 5 years, usually with boots. As you can see, there is some peeling and slight felting in the heel area, but the toe part looks almost intact and there are no holes anywhere. And again, they were worn daily for several seasons with boots. So that's what the resilient sock yarn can do. Now let's get back to my project. I think I'll keep this upper part of the sock. It's in the best shape. The rest of the sock has to go though. It's pretty worn out and mended with different yarn, especially the heel. I'd like to save this portion because it looks very pretty, but at a closer look, it's also a bit worn out, and I found a couple of holes. Here is one hole, and there is another one here, so I'm not sure if I can salvage this piece. I have some sock yarn in my stash. This white one looks a bit too bright. The creamy one looks better, but it's a little off. I'm not sure it would work. I also have this red sock yarn. I like how it looks. I think it matches the red yarn in the sock very closely. And charcoal gray sock yarn. I like this color too. So I'll probably use these 2 colors. I finally settled on the red color. It's Merino Yak by Regia, 4-ply sock yarn, 400 meters in 100 grams. So I'm cutting off the old worn out part of the sock, the foot. And I'm doing it at a distance from the part that I want to salvage. I'm using scissors because this area is a bit felted, so it's faster and easier to just cut it off instead of pulling out a single strand of yarn. Here there is a seam, but it wasn't seamed well, it's at an angle. Hopefully I'll be able to straighten it out. Now I have to clean up this slightly felted edge. I'm using a tapestry needle. It's a bit tedious, but I believe it will be worth it. I'm unraveling a couple of rounds to make both of my salvaged pieces even. My yarn calls for the needle size 2 to 3 millimeters. I already worked with this yarn before, I know my gauge, and I like to use a 2 millimeter needle or US 0. My salvaged piece has 74 stitches. To keep the same circumference with the new yarn, I need 68 stitches. 74 minus 68 equals 6. This means that I have 6 extra stitches and I will need to make 6 decreases. I'm leaving the yarn tail of about 20 centimeters or 8 inches because I will later use it to reinforce the seam. This piece was seamed. My first decrease is right at the seam, before the first marker. It's a simple 2 stitches knit together. And I'll do this 6 times. Now I have 68 stitches and I can continue knitting the sock using the new yarn. Here is the original worn out piece removed and my first sock is transformed. This is the sock pair number 2. It's a very sad looking gray pair. The holes are really giant. They were mended with cotton. The middle section is felted, so I don't think that the foot of the sock is salvageable at all. This trim at the top, it kind of doesn't match, and it's also a cast on edge here, so I can just remove it. I'm planning to keep this nice part of the sock just between these two lines. Here it was a bit easier to separate the good from the bad because this cotton yarn is not felting at all, so I can just pull the stitch out and cut it with my scissors. Now I'm going to use a tapestry needle to pull the yarn out stitch by stitch. It's much easier than working with the felted pair of socks that I showed earlier. I separated these two pieces and cleaned up the trim. And I'm thinking of using this sock yarn by Regia. The recommended needle size is 2 to 3 millimeters. And another yarn by Regia, again, the recommended needle size is the same, 2 to 3 millimeters. I already worked with this yarn before, and I like to use size 2 millimeters or US 0. I wasn't completely sure about which color to use, so I decided to double check. The gray looks really good. I think that it's a very close shade to the gray in the salvaged piece. But I'm having second thoughts about the white yarn. It's a bit too bright and it's not as fuzzy as the yarn in this piece. So maybe not. I think I'll just use the gray color to simplify. So that's one piece still to work on. And here is the finished sock, the new look of the old sock. I thought I was finished with this pair until my mom tried it on. And it turned out that this part of the sock didn't work. It's too thin, not a true rib, and it was losing its shape. So I decided to remake it. At first I tried to salvage the yarn and maybe reinforce it by adding another fine strand, but it was very fragile, so I decided to use sock yarn instead. From this edge, I decided to add 3x3 ribbing using the same sock yarn by Regia. It's Merino Yak 4-ply, 400 meters in 100 grams. It's wool with yak and 28% polyamide. And it's a lighter gray color, 07511. My baseline was in white color, 70 stitches in circumference. I started with needle size 2 millimeters or US 0, the same size I used for the foot. I used the leftover of the charcoal gray yarn from the foot to add 2 knit stitch rounds here. So here I had 1 knit stitch round and then another knit stitch round. I worked 2 rounds of the dark gray because of the zigzag lines above and below the flower that are 2 stitches high. 1 and 2. And here also 1 and 2. That's why I repeated this idea here, 1 and 2. Before starting the ribbing, I changed my needle to a smaller size, 1.75 millimeters or US 00. I worked 1 knit stitch round with this smaller needle using the new lighter gray color. And in this knit stitch round, after every 5 stitches, I made 14 increases using the KFB technique. By adding 14 stitches, I reached a total of 84 stitches in circumference, which is divisible by 6. And after that, I started the 3x3 rib and continued it almost to the end. Here in one round, I swapped the stitches to switch from a 3x3 to a 1x1 rib. Then I worked 1 round of 1x1 ribbing. And for the last step, I used the tapestry needle, the smallest one that I have, to do the invisible rib bind off. This is how the edge looks. The stitches look like they roll over. It is stretchy enough because I added enough stitches for the ribbing and I didn't bind it off too tightly. For the final touch, I added some simple embroidery, just outlining certain stitches. I used the light gray yarn to complement the cuff's color. I embroidered the centers of all the flowers and on this side too. I thought that this little detail brings a nice harmony to the overall look. I actually ended up making a 3rd pair of socks from this leftover piece. I managed to salvage some of this section here, even though it had several holes. There is a big hole here and another one there, but I still decided to give it a try. I'm cutting off the toe part. Here I can cut pretty close to the part that I want to save, because I'll still have to remove a lot of it due to the holes. And I'll cut off this portion as well. This is how much I was able to salvage. I'm keeping stitches on a short cable on one side, and I'm going to knit first on the other side. And I already finished the foot of one of the socks. This is how it looks. I used gray yarn for the foot and red for the toe. And I'm thinking of adding ribbing here. Maybe I'll use red or maybe gray. I think gray might add more contrast. I only have 18 grams left, and I divided the leftover into 2 parts, 9 grams each. For the foot, I used the 2mm needle or US 0. Here I want to do 2x2 ribbing. For a neat-looking ribbing, I will use a smaller needle size, 1.75mm or US 00. And I'm keeping the original number of the stitches, so no decreases. I'll first replace this stopper with a needle. I really love these short cables as stitch holders. I use them for socks and for sleeves. And these stoppers are so cute, they literally look like candy. Now I'm going to attach one of my thinnest needle tips here, just for the first round, so I can start the magic loop. I'm securing the tip. And I'm now ready to continue. I want to leave about 20 centimeters or 8 inches of the yarn tail. I will use it later to reinforce this seam. You can see a thread sticking out. This piece was seamed, and I don't want it to come apart later, so I will need to have a longer yarn tail to secure it. And the first stitch is a little bit of a challenge, but there you go. I will not start the ribbing right away. I will knit one regular knit stitch round first, because it will help me to avoid baggy rib stitches. I'm starting the 2x2 rib with one purl stitch right near the seam, and then proceed with the usual. Two knit stitches, two purl stitches, and so on. And I will finish the round with one purl stitch, because a purl stitch column here is going to look better later on. So there you have it, 2 new socks, with some left over from the old ones. Here the purl stitch column kind of continues the seam, so it looks like a nice transition. For binding off, I used the invisible ribbed binding off method. It resembles the Italian cast on edge, and I really like how it looks. It's stretchy enough, I can recommend it. Just make sure to have enough of the rib stitches and don't make the bind off too tight. This turned out to be a very economical project. It used only 167 grams of yarn. I used up the entire 100 grams of the charcoal gray color, 50 grams of the red, and 17 grams of the lighter gray. I want to talk a little about how I would care for these hybrid socks to maximize their lifespan. These are the care instructions for the Regia sock yarn. It says machine wash on delicate cycle at 30°C, do not bleach, do not tumble dry, lay flat in the shade, use low iron, and dry clean without tetrachloroethylene. But my new socks are hybrid socks because the salvage parts do not contain nylon. It's a 100% wool content. Here I have an example of a 100% natural content yarn where it's recommended to hand wash in cool water and lay flat to dry. So I will follow this recommendation, which is for the more delicate fiber. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and to support the channel. Happy knitting, and I'll see you in the next one.